Bob's TV show. I'm Bob. For those of you that have not watched the show before, I talk about a lot of different things. Primarily, though, it's a lot, in fact, is to update you on various medical therapies going on all over the world, therapies, medical research, essentially, into therapies, prevention, and diagnostics. And as I always say, it's all over the world, basically, that this is happening. This isn't just the United States. It's happening everywhere. When I read these papers in different magazines that I get and so on, it's always everywhere, basically. Not so much in certain areas of the world. I won't get into all that, but it's not just the United States, put it that way. Although a lot of researchers come here, in fact, and a lot of collaboration. I could get into a whole area. In fact, I probably will talk about that a little bit. Anyway, and that's what I'm going to do tonight. I decided just now. In fact, I decided I'm going to start with this. Except, of course, as you saw by the front of the show here, I'm also going to maybe at some point in time I may talk about this current series of articles in the Santa Barbara News Press. Started Sunday and it went through this today, Thursday. Of a five-part series about the events surrounding the death of the young lady, Mallory Dyes, who was run over, basically, and killed, essentially killed on the spot, really, because she was brain dead when she died 5 days later, but she was essentially killed by a young man named Raymond Morua. I'm sure, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly or not, and who is now in county jail and probably will be in prison at least for 10 years, according to the paper, and probably more like 12 or 15 years. It's a long story. Hopefully you've read it in the News Press, the series. I think it's very good. And the real crux of it is, I mean, there's no denying that the guy did it. He was chased and actually apprehended, essentially, by a young man who chased him down the street in his car, in his car, and ended up on Cabrillo Boulevard, blah, blah, blah. Most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with all this stuff and so on. At any rate, the real crux of this whole thing, as tragic as this event may be, and it is tragic, obviously. Young girl, prime of her life is run down, essentially. That's always tragic, in fact. There's more to the story. And the story is that the young man that did it was a representative of Lois Capps, the congresswoman from this district, 24th Congressional District. The story that goes around about that, it happened on a Thursday night, and the events that came from that point on, December 5th of last year, and it went on to into that weekend and then through the week, and a lot of things happened and so on. If you read the articles, which I strongly recommend you do, you will see that there's some question about certain things that some of the people in the Lois Capps office did to, how should I say, put out the fire, circle the wagons, cover up. It sounds to me like a lot of it is cover up. The author of the articles is a guy named Peter Lance, who you may remember was the series of articles on the Casey Butel Gate. The officer that stopped him, in fact, from a DUI, and it got him involved in it. And that one ran to 10 articles and was in the papers for a long time. Some of you, I'm sure, know about that and so on. He got off. That was dismissed. He got his license back. And the whole thing happened over a period of many months and so on. Well, this is an investigative reporter. What I'm trying to get across here is that this guy is very good at what he does. He's written several books. An investigative reporter. He knows a lot of people all over the country, New York, Washington, D.C., probably a lot of other places too. He quotes a lot of people that you and I could never talk to, never even find, basically, never even knew about. And we'll do that maybe later. Anyway, I guess he's very good at what he does, basically. And he's the author of these articles, too. He's a Democrat, too, by the way, voted for Lois Capps, according to what the article says. Again, if you read the article, you'll see that. He worked for another Democrat, state senator, Hannah Beth Jackson, and there's a story about that, too. And he's very good at what he does. And these articles are very specific and so on. I can only tell you that the reaction from the Lois Capps office is, according to Lois Capps herself, says that she cannot comment on there's numerous, something like that, numerous inaccuracies in the article, but she can't comment about it because it's in the investigation, and in fact will be a lawsuit. In fact, the lawyer for the parents of the girl who died have filed a lawsuit against Lois Capps' office because, according to them, this young man who ended up, as I say now, in jail today, and then that essentially killed this girl, was working. He was actually working at the time. And there's a whole story about it. I'm sure a lot of people want to have a controversy about that and so on. And I'd like to get into that, but I don't want to do that tonight. I want to talk about cancer. Well, I've been talking about it a long time, obviously, and anybody that's watched the show, and I want to continue to do that. It's just, something, as I said before in many shows, things come up, things all of a sudden jump out at me. In fact, I've been watching a lot of things on the internet. They got a new monitor, in fact, from my computer, and I've been kind of watching a bigger one. I won't tell you the size. It's a pretty good size, though. And you can really see a lot of different things on it. It's almost like movies. And I've been watching a lot of lectures and animations like you saw tonight and so on and so forth. And some things popped out at me that I really want to talk about tonight about cancer. So I'm not going to talk about Lois Capps-gate, at least not unless I run out of stuff to say about cancer and so on. But I'm going to do it at some point in time because it's a very interesting, I guess I'll finish off that by saying, Lois Capps, if you're out there listening or anybody who knows her and so on, just admit it. He was working for you. You may or may not have known he had a drinking problem and so on and so forth, but anybody can make that mistake. But if you try to cover this up, it's going to be like the gate that comes at the end of all these things and so on. It ain't going to work. It just ain't going to work. Not with this guy, Peter Lance, working against you and so on. I will tell you this. I don't think Peter has told you everything he knows so far. He's waiting to see what kind of reaction you get. And it's not going to wait either, by the way, because the lawsuit will be reported in the press. It'll certainly be reported in the news press, but it'll be reported in a lot of other places too. It can't go away. Drudge Report and so on. And one more thing I will tell you, it's going to probably go to court because as I understand that the House of Representatives is controlled by the Republicans and Lois Capps is a Democrat and she's running for re-election in November, it would be to their benefit to see to it that there is a trial and all this stuff comes out. This will not be settled out of court. This is going to be litigated, and all this information is going to be out there. It would benefit the Republicans, essentially, who would perhaps gain this seat. She won, as I just checked, won by 55% last year, which is a pretty good percentage. But the district has changed, and this may be a factor in that election, depending on the information we get from the lawsuit, which will be reported by the papers and so on. It'll be in the headlines, certainly in the news press, and everywhere else too, for that matter. I'm sure it hasn't gotten the Fox News yet that I know about. In fact, some of you'll see the number on the screen. You can go ahead and call me if you want to talk about this, but you better do it in the next few minutes because once I start talking about cancer, I'm not going to take any phone calls. At any rate. That's my point on that. I'll talk more about that as things unfold. Essentially, we'll see what happens with this whole thing. But again, I would counsel them at the Lois Capps office and so on. Just admit it. He was working at the time. Take your medicine, and you may make a mistake. But the cover up, that's what cost Richard Nixon his job. It wasn't that these idiots broke into that Watergate apartment or office or whatever it was. It was they tried to cover it up. And that just doesn't, it never has worked. I can't think of when I was talking to my director tonight. I can't think of when any cover-up has ever worked. It just doesn't work. Don't try it. At any rate, because Peter Lance is watching. That should be enough for right there. He's watching. Any rate, cancer. I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight. As I say, I've I'm going to say run into a lot of different videos and so on. I'm trying to put them all together here. And it'll come back to a subject very close to my heart that I've mentioned several different times. And anybody that's watched the show knows that I have a very special focus on cancer. But the first video we're going to show you tonight is the trailer for a series that's going to be on public broadcasting, not public access broadcasting, but public PBS, produced by Ken Burns, who I'm sure many of you know who that is. He's produced a lot of very good documentaries on baseball and Civil War and I don't know, the war, World War II. I mean, all kinds of different things. Very good stuff. And he's going to produce one on cancer, the Emperor of All Maladies, which is also, by the way, a title of a book. You'll see it on the screen right there, written by, you can pronounce the guy's name yourself. I can't pronounce it. He's I believe is Indian or something like that, but he is a doctor, medical doctor from Harvard Medical School, and he wrote this book, A History of Cancer, basically. And it's very good. I've read it more than once, really. I suppose I've read excerpts from it a lot. I may have talked about it, in fact, even on the show. I don't recall. And I would recommend that you read it. I mean, I think it's a very good book. You can get it on, probably get it in audio books too, I'm sure. But I don't know. I mean, I would recommend you read the book and so on. Because it talks about, how can I really say this? It's almost like cancer is your friend. It's a bad friend, very bad friend, of course, but it's like a person. It's like a thing you're trying to figure out. You're trying to understand it. And that's the way the book kind of goes. How it goes through all of it almost personalizes the disease. And it goes back, the book, it goes all the way back to Roman times and so on and so forth, but he talks about it. And I think it's going to be a very interesting series, and I will want to show you now the video of the trailer for this series, which, by the way, will be out in spring of 2015. If you want to roll it, go ahead, Fred.
Our film project, The Emperor of All Maladies, is about as close to the bone as filmmaking gets for me. There's not a person in our country that has not in some way been affected by this disease, cancer. And it's time we sort of put away the superstitions and the fears and the anxieties and sort of ran up against it. And try to put it in some sort of perspective that might arm us as viewers and filmmakers and patients to make a difference.
One of my patients asked me a very simple question: what is it that I'm fighting? And I was drawn, sort of obsessively drawn to this question, because I thought to myself, well, here's something that is going to intersect with all of our lives. And yet we know very little about it. We don't know its history. Where does it rise? What happens next? Where are we in this journey? So I decided to take the journey way back into the past and way forward into the future, to try to understand, why are we here today with cancer?
I'm not a scientist. I don't know whether this will all pan out, but there's a sense, a kind of palpable energy and excitement that we may be on the cusp of some significant changes, some significant breakthroughs, some new and radical therapies and treatments that will change our relationship to the disease.
Make no mistake, this is one of the most significant human challenges in our history. But I think we're sitting in an extraordinary moment, because we finally are beginning to understand what causes cancer at a cellular or molecular or genetic level in a way we just did not know 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. Every year has brought a kind of clarity to our understanding of what goes wrong in a cancer cell The big question is, can we convert that into treatment, prevention, or cure?
I think it's a project that I couldn't not get involved with. I'm a very busy filmmaker. I plan things out 10 years in advance. Everything was lined up, but I couldn't say no to this project. There is never a moment in my awareness as a human being that I didn't know that something was desperately wrong with my mother. 2.5, 3 years old, she was sick with cancer. She died when I was 11, almost 12 years old. The reason why I do what I do comes from this illness and this death and watching it happen. This film feels very much part of everything I've wanted to do, and it feels completely unique, and I'm looking forward to the journey.
Something I would think, as I say, this comes out in supposedly in the spring of 2015, which is still quite a ways away, but I'm sure this is probably the first inkling that you have and know about it. And it will basically cover the history of cancer and so on, so it won't really talk about cures and things like that. But I thought Ken Burns is, as I say, a fantastic documentarian. The fellow who wrote the book, whose name I can't pronounce, you saw it on the screen. It is a very, he's a very, very well-written book. Like I say, it almost personalizes the whole thing. It makes it interesting. It's a puzzle, trying to figure out just what it does. And as he indicated, it's down to the molecular level. It's down to the, I won't use that word yet. It's down to the level of they can really understand a lot of what cancer is all about. Well, I'll get into that in a little bit and so on. But like I say, the way they present it and so on, it affects everybody. I don't think there's anybody out there that is watching the show tonight has not been affected by cancer in some way. Either you or somebody you know very well, one of your relatives, a loved one, knows somebody who's had cancer. It's the emperor of all maladies, as the book suggests. That's why it's so important to us. But as he said too, it's just going back to see how we have tried to fight this, how we have tried to cure it, how we have tried to understand it, what cancer really is. By the way, this book won a Pulitzer Prize. I'm looking forward to his next book. I'm not sure what it will be about, but we'll see what happens. He's a very, I can say I'm going to watch it. I don't know if I'll learn much about it because I read the book, of course, but and I've done a lot about it. But it has that. It gives everybody the hopefully, and it will talk about the advances that are coming. It'll talk about it'll give people a hope. I guess that's really what it amounts to. I used to call this show Medical Hope, and that's really what it amounts to. And the more I get into it, I've been doing this now for 15 years, talking about medicine and so on and so forth, and believe me, well, if they don't understand it, I sure as heck don't understand it, how to get by with it and so on. But at any rate, I thought it was very interesting that I would watch it. It's a beginning. You to start to really understand cancer is to watch a show like this and so on. I would strongly recommend it. You'll probably hear more about it all the time. They'll be interviewing Ken Burns and so on, and Charlie Rose and this and that and so on. It gives us hope. It gives us people hope who have cancer. I'm sure, as I just got through saying, all of you out there know somebody who has died of cancer or has cancer, currently been diagnosed with cancer. It's an interesting disease. It's really what it amounts to. It's very interesting to do it. Of course, I don't have cancer myself, as far as I know, and because it's a disease that you have and you don't even know it to some degree. But anyway, don't have it yet. Anyway, because as you get older, that's what you're going to die of, either cancer or heart attack, one or the other. The dying of smallpox and things, those are gone. There's only really two big causes of the death among old people, and that's, of course, what I am. And so again, it's a very interesting situation. If I can live long enough, I want to live long enough just to see what's going to happen. I guess that's what it amounts to. And anything, especially with regard to cancer. In the last 15 years I've been doing this, in fact, there have been huge advances in cancer. There are people living today who were diagnosed with cancer a year ago, or even just recently and so on, who, if that same diagnosis had been maybe 2 years ago, as they said, I think in that video, as they said, who diagnosed 2 years ago, past, would not be living today. It's anecdotal, it's individual and so on, but there are people out there. Now, okay, the next video you're going to see is not quite so dramatic as far as the documentary is concerned, but it's an interesting, it was an interesting milestone, really, in cancer research. A guy named Robert Weinberg, and I believe the guy's name is Hanahan, who about 12 years ago defined what the hallmarks of cancer were. There are six hallmarks that you can get cancer. Cancer is actually very hard to get. Your body has been fighting these abnormal mutant cells that cause disease for a long time. The immune system doesn't want to see these cells that are not doing the job they're supposed to be doing, and it fights it. And it goes through, as they suggest here, six. Oh boy, I lost my phone here. I don't know what the time is anymore. Hang on a minute, folks. Let me see what I got here. No, I'm back. Oh, doesn't matter. Anyway, I got the clock over here, so I got to keep my time here. So I know I get talking too long, and then I don't remember what I did, what my time is. Anyway, where's I? The hallmarks of cancer. There are certain things that happen that have to happen to get cancer. And like I say, it's not easy to get, but the fact that you have trillions of cells in your body and they're always subject to mutations, it happens. That's what happens. So this is a hallmark of cancer. Now, what you're going to see is an interview, essentially, from some conference or other, of one of the authors, not Weinberg, but the other guy, Hanahan, and he'll be identified on the screen. You'll see what his name is. He's a doctor, too. And that's 12 years later to see if the hallmarks have changed at all. Now listen very carefully. I'll try to explain some of the things after they come back as much as I can. Not being a doctor, of course, it's pretty tough. But we'll go back and see. I'll give you hints of what they talk about. But I hope you understand, again, that this is it's not easy to get cancer. You can, your body is fighting this all the time. It's the nature of nature. It's the nature of the organism to fight back. The organism, your body, doesn't want to die, doesn't want to go out. Unfortunately, it does anyway, because nobody lives forever, but it's always fighting. And you can help it, of course, too. I'm sure many of you out there, do healthy stuff and so on and so forth. But eventually, you have to succumb to the inevitable call of what nature really is, and it doesn't give people life forever. But anyway, I'm getting off the subject here. It's hard to get cancer, and as I say, after this is done, I will try to expound a little bit on what this doctor is saying, because he talks about some medical terms, but he has a pretty good understanding. I picked this one out because it's a little more understandable than a lot of scientists talking. Anyway, if you want to show that, Fred, let's see it. Hallmarks of cancer.
More than 10 years ago, Doug Hanahan and Bob Weinberg started discussing exactly what it is that makes a cancer cell cancerous. They came up with 6 key features, called them the hallmarks of cancer, and published a paper that went on to become phenomenally successful. They've since updated it, and here at the ESMO Congress in Vienna, Doug Hanahan gave the keynote lecture. I caught up with him and asked him how it all came about.
Bob Weinberg and I had never really worked together, and we were very different people, but somehow we complemented each other, and it was just a terrific intellectual collaboration. And so we spent a day together. And so we started talking about cancer science, and we started talking about the complexity, and we started discussing that perhaps there was an underlying commonality to all this complexity. And during the course of the day, this idea gelled that there was a small set of acquired capabilities, so-called hallmarks of cancer, that were perhaps common to many forms of cancer.
What were the 6 hallmarks?
The first one is the most obvious one, and that is essentially stimulating cell division. That cancer is fundamentally a proliferative disease, and the first hallmark is essentially putting your foot on the accelerator with growth signals of one form or another to tell cells to grow and divide. Second hallmark is really taking away the brakes, that most normal cells have a series of brakes that are meant to prevent continuing proliferation, which under normal circumstances is transitory. And these brakes are often called tumor suppressors because the brakes suppress tumor growth, and tumors find one way or another to circumvent or abrogate many of these brakes during the course of their development. The third hallmark reflects another variation on that theme, which is that normal cells have adopted a strategy for programmed suicide, or programmed cell death, that if they perceive or their neighbors perceive that they're behaving aberrantly, signals can be sent that cause the cell to die. And in particular, aberrant proliferation can evoke those signals, so that most tumors we believe, have learned how to limit this programmed cell death, of which there are several variants on the theme we now appreciate, but it seems a general property that cancer cells learn how to limit, if not completely eliminate, this propensity for cell suicide. The fourth one it reflects yet another check and balance on continuous chronic proliferation, and that is the counting mechanism embedded in the telomeres of our chromosomes, which upon every cell division get shorter. And stem cells and developing cells have mechanisms, principally telomerase, to preserve the ends of telomeres and to give themselves more extensive replicative capacity. And what we now appreciate is that most tumors figure out how to preserve their telomeres so that they are not stopped dead in their tracks by this propensity to block proliferation after a certain number of divisions have happened. So that's the fourth hallmark. The fifth one then goes beyond the cancer cell to look at the tumor as an organ, and it was long appreciated that most normal organs require vascularization, and so too do tumors, and therefore most tumors turn on the growth of new blood vessels, the process of angiogenesis. The sixth one is really the co-option of a developmental capability for migration, so-called invasion and metastasis, because again, cancers don't invent new things. They co-opt processes, functions that are used in development in normal homeostasis, but they subvert them for their own purposes. So again, during development, the cells invade across tissue beds and cells migrate long distances. And so there is clearly a program in all cells for invasion and metastasis. And the notion was that this, again, there were many ways to regulate this capability, but that most tumors, one way or another, were turning on a capability for invasion and metastasis. So those were the 6 hallmarks in the year 2000.
So if we fast forward to 2011 and the updated paper, those 6 hallmarks and your framework has remained basically intact.
You know, interestingly, during the subsequent decade, it was clear that no major data or concepts came forward that argued that these were not general. I mean, there are tumors that are not invasive. There are tumors that are very poorly vascularized. But most tumors that are problematic have invasive or metastatic properties, they have angiogenic properties, and they have ways to preserve their telomeres. So there was really no general counter arguments to the proposition that these were generic. And in fact, I think that the popularity of the perspective was that most people actually thought this was probably reasonably correct.
There were a couple of new hallmarks, though.
Well, one of the most common things that happened during that decade was people sending us, Bob Weinberg and I, messages telling us at conferences that we'd forgotten something and that the six were fine, but what about this and that? And the first one was the reprogramming of cellular energetics and metabolism, that cancer cells are dividing very rapidly, whereas the cells of origin from which they came were generally quiescent in tissues doing different jobs in support of the tissue and the organism. Cancer cells need to grow rapidly, they need oxygen, they need energy, they need biomaterials, and it became increasingly clear that that cancer cells reprogram their energy metabolism. And so we put it out as an emerging hallmark to sort of, and explain that while we were persuaded it was very important, we were still a little unsure about how separable it was from the loss of growth controls and from driving proliferation, namely the two core hallmarks. There are now data coming out that suggest that at least in some tumors there are mutations that affect metabolism that don't affect cell division. And so I think in the end it probably will stand as a discrete hallmark, but whether it will be general to that separability will be general to many forms of cancer or selective for a few is still unclear. And so, but it certainly is, in terms of understanding how the machine works, arguably a hallmark.
Is that the same debate then about evading the immune response?
Correct. This has again been a very controversial field. There is evidence in animal models for so-called immune surveillance, but the data in humans is more complex. For example, transplant patients that are chronically immunosuppressed, HIV patients, do not have increased incidences of the major forms of human cancer. What they have is increased incidences of virally induced cancers. On the other hand, there's provocative data suggesting that the density of cytotoxic T cells in a tumor actually is a good prognostic factor and says that you'll live longer. And so our feeling was that the immune system is actually impacting tumors in different tumor types, maybe at different stages in the development and progression of cancers, but that the immune system was a factor, was a barrier to the development of at least some kinds of cancer, and a barrier to be circumvented, and therefore arguably a capability of successful tumors was to evade whatever challenges the immune system erected. But again, we posed it as an emerging hallmark because of this question of generality. It's very clear in some forms of human cancer that the immune system is a barrier, but it's not clear that it's a barrier in all forms.
What applications are there from the hallmarks? Do you see them informing drug development, for example?
There are targeted therapies aimed at all of the hallmarks, and each of them individually, and some hit a couple of them, but there are specific targeted therapies for many of them, which is very exciting. But the sobering reality is that most targeted therapies don't work very long. They work for a while, and then the tumor figures out a way around that. So that's just like the barriers that resulted in the initial hallmarks, is that again, therapy is another barrier along with the developmental barriers they face, and tumors are mutable, they're adaptable, and they figure out a way around it. So that's been the reality of targeted therapies, that they are not the miracle cures that one might have fantasized about. So the hypothesis is, and this is strictly a hypothesis, is that perhaps if one targeted multiple hallmarks at the same time, that one would present so many barriers that a tumor couldn't figure out how to get around all of them sort of simultaneously, and therefore could really be impaired in terms of its ability to progress.
So the hallmarks of cancer have stood the test of time and continue to provide a straightforward framework in the increasingly complex field of cancer. And with thanks to Doug Hanahan, that's it for this month's EJC News Focus.
Okay, yeah, that's got a lot, talks a lot about it. This paper that was written by Robert Weinberg and the other fellow Hanahan there, I should have got the name down correctly, but Robert Weinberg is the big name in this. That's the one that's always quoted anyway. And you'll see some lectures by Weinberg too. We've got some other things that we'll talk about there too. At any rate, it was the most quoted paper, I guess, of any scientific paper ever written. Maybe of any scientific paper, and not just cancer research. It's quoted all the time. And the reason I think for that is, and by the way, you see the phone number up on the screen. If anybody's out there that disagrees with what I'm saying or wants to add something to it, please give me a call. We can take calls on this now. We're going to forget about Lois for a while and just talk about the cancer business here. I talked about, anyway, I talked earlier, if you're just tuning in, I talked about something else earlier. At any rate, Lois Capps. We're not going to talk about that. The reason it was quoted, I think, is because it established how do you attack cancer. As he said in the interview there, it has established therapies on every level. You can attack cancer in a lot of different levels here, in the mutation sense, in the metastasis sense, in the telomeres. I'm not going to get into what those are. Angiogenesis, the vascularization for tumors. A drug, and I talked about what was the name now? I can't remember now. The fellow in the Folker. Judah Folkman in Boston, that basically invented an anti-angiogenesis drug which causes cancer cells not to vasculate, which of course then will kill them because they have to have a blood supply. TEMU suppressor genes discovered by a guy named J. Michael Bishop and one other, I can't remember his name. There were tumor suppressor genes. In certain certain cases, it is not all genes, mutations. You can have a lot of mutations in your body that have no effect whatsoever. Doesn't do anything. There are a lot of things in your body that you have genes you're carrying along, archaic genes they call them, that you've had since millions and millions and millions of years, but they didn't do any harm, so they just kept on going. They weren't wiped out because they didn't harm the organism. And so you can have mutations in those and nothing happens. Same with oncogenes. The tumor suppressor genes suppress the growth of cells. Oncogenes are necessary to make the cells grow in a certain way. He talked about, for example, another one to do, as I already said, the telomeres. Your cells are programmed to die. The body cells in the body are programmed to die. They're not there to live forever. That's what cancer by definition is. It's an uncontrolled growth of cells that never die. They just keep on going. And there again, it's a mutation basically. Well, as they say, there's a lot of things, as he said in the interview. It's a lot of different things happen, and in fact, sometimes they just go away. He mentioned the immune system. Your immune system. You should never let your immune system down. You should always keep it as high as you possibly can, because it does fight the body. This has been going on for millions and millions of years. The body has adapted, or living life has had, not just in humans, but all animals, has adapted to fight the inevitable, as I said before, but for as long as it possibly can. And by enhancing the immune system and keeping it intact, the body can self-confide. This Charles Sawyer's lecture we had here a few weeks ago at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute Harley Lecture Series talks about the immune system. That is another way of fighting cancer. to make sure that the immune system is working properly to do what it naturally would do, is take cells that are are foreign, are not doing their job, and the immune system kills them off. Your system is doing that as we speak tonight. That's what it's supposed to do, your immune system. I don't know, it goes on and on about things like that. I could talk a lot about the different processes, but the bottom line here is that your immune system, that cancer, as I said before this video, is very difficult to get, and it can be attacked at a lot of different levels. If it misses one of these hallmarks, it has to go through all of them, and if it misses one of these hallmarks, then your cancer we're going to go away. And that's really what the basis for therapies have been for the last 10 years, attacking one of those hallmarks somewhere along the line. It's a chain reaction. It's a progression of these things. If you can stop it at any one of those, even at the metastasis level, that's mostly what kills people, is when a cancer spreads. When it gets that, if you can stop it even at that level, I won't use the word cure, but it certainly can help you live a lot longer. In that respect, so that's why I point out these hallmarks of cancer. It's very famous. Anybody that's in the cancer field, anybody that knows medical medicine, knows about this, because, as I say, it's the most quoted article in scientific journals, I guess, ever, or something like that. It's very, very famous, and it hasn't changed much, as he said. Really, there's been some other things and so on, and it's complicated. It isn't quite so simple. It's just step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, step 6, and so on. Your body itself can fight it, and there's a lot of little nooks and crannies and so on that you have to have and all that. It's not a simple thing. As I said at the beginning of the show, it's like a friend that you don't quite understand. We're trying to understand it. But speaking of understanding it, the next video is going to talk about something that I've talked about here in many, many shows. I'm getting to be known for that, in fact. People stop and talk to me in the street, and it's genetics. Down to the genetic level. The doctor who wrote the book here mentions it in his book. We're down to that level of molecular study, understanding cancer on the molecular level, on the element level, the oxygen, hydrogen, carbon atoms, and so on, and how they form to get these molecules, the nucleotides, and all the different chemicals. That's what your body is made of, a bunch of chemicals, really. That's what it amounts to. How these chemicals all interact and so on. We're getting down to that level. But it really starts with the genes, with the genetics. What a gene's expressed. Not all genes are expressed the same way. As for those of you that understand this, you don't have to listen to this part, but all your cells in your body have the same genetic code. Basically it's the same thing. Every cell, the brain cell, liver cell, skin cell, hair cell, all that has the same genetic code, but how it's expressed makes for the cancer, the skin cell, liver cell, heart cell, so on, hair cells, and so on. How it's expressed is what makes it a particular part of your body. That's the key to it. And there's understanding. It's called epigenetics. If you are, in fact, what am I trying to say here? If you get to that point where you have I'm losing my train of thought here now. Gosh, I can't think of what I'm saying. Let me think. Hang on a second. Let me get a grip on this. The genetic level. If it comes down to the genes, and as I've talked about in many shows before, that's, I think, where the secret's really going to be. It's down to that level where they can understand the reaction of a gene, but they don't really know what the chemical reaction is yet. They know the genes. They're called cancer genes. There's only 236 of them and counting, a little more and so on. Out of 20,000 genes, there's only 236 that actually are involved in cancer in some way. And all of these hallmarks have to do with cancer that changes. When he talks about the body, the immune system, or whatever, they're really talking about some kind of genetic change that's happened detrimental to your body and causing cancer, or beneficial to your body, even at some point, perhaps. That's what evolution is all about, basically. It's beneficial the mutations that make people adaptable to certain environments, perhaps against cancer. At any rate, that's the next step in this process. Now, the next video you're going to see has to do with that, a theme that I have talked about many times before, and I know this video, I've had it now for a month or so, and I just happened to run into it. Again, one of those things, I'm watching these videos and so on, and it just struck me. And there's one statement in here I want you to be, well, you won't know it until I tell you to look for it. I may have run it twice, in fact. It's just a commercial, basically, for a company called Cancer Centers of America. They have these places all over the country, not a few places, not too many, and a lot of other cancer centers too, and doing the same kind of thing. I'm not advertising this particular cancer centers and so on. It's the idea. But there's a statement in there said by an oncologist, a doctor at one of these cancer centers, one of their hospitals that they have. That's very important. So let's see that commercial right now, and then I'll point out to you, we may run it again so you can hear it all over again. Anyway, let's see that commercial right now, Fred.
I think genomic testing is the future of cancer in every possible way. It's the most exciting thing that's happened to cancer in decades.
This is the new era of cancer therapy, targeted specifically against those mistakes in the cell's genes that give them the capacity to behave the way they do.
What we're talking about here is a test, a diagnostic test. We look for very specific abnormalities present within the tumor. And the idea here is that we are going to be able to be more precise in finding a particular abnormality in an individual patient's cancer.
Genomic tumor assessment is an innovative new diagnostic tool for treating cancer. By assessing a patient's specific tumor on a genetic level, a much more precise treatment protocol is possible.
We've been searching for better ways to treat cancer for more than 100 years. The earliest drugs were drugs that were aimed at stopping cells from dividing. Unfortunately, those early drugs did not have any selective capacity to stop cancer cells compared to normal cells. They could also cause an enormous amount of toxicity. It was very difficult for patients to tolerate that.
So far, we've always defined cancer from the organ it comes from. If it's breast cancer. If it's from the lung, it's lung cancer. If it's colon cancer. And we've tended to group all of that together as meaning the same thing. In the last few years, we've realized that just because it's breast cancer doesn't mean it all behaves the same as the other breast cancers. And we're really starting to define within the cancer what drives the cancers.
So we're not going to be thinking so much about, is this a breast cancer or a lung cancer? We're going to be thinking, what is it that's driving the growth of this cancer, and how do we stop it? So if it's going to be stopped by a drug that we would not normally consider for lung cancer, we'll give the drug that we would never have given to lung cancer patients previously.
The ability to design a more precise drug treatment based on a genetic profile of a specific tumor will enable more personalized and targeted treatment and may reduce common side effects of traditional cancer treatments, like chemotherapy.
The first and foremost thing is to obtain a biopsy, and then the results are analyzed in a variety of different ways.
For example, in colon cancer, there are certain proteins that we know are responsible for the cell continuing to proliferate and not stop dividing. We know which proteins they are, and we know which genes make them. So we take cancer cells from the colon and we sequence those parts of the gene responsible for those proteins. If they're normal sequences, we know what kind of drug to use to treat the cancer.
It helps you to really hone down your treatments and, attack it with a missile instead of a bomb. It's going to drive the way we treat cancer. It's going to change the way we research treatments for cancer. It's really a huge changing frontier.
This is a very exciting development for Cancer Treatment Centers of America and our patients because our organization has, for 3 decades, focused on the patient, the individual. And of course, the concept of precision medicine is to focus on the individual tumor in the individual patient, which fits very nicely with what we're trying to do.
If we can understand patients down to their genetic makeup, I think it's incredibly promising that we'll be able to offer them therapies that will restore hope for a better life.
Now keep in mind, this is the Cancer Centers of America, Cancer Treatment Centers of America, whatever they call themselves and so on. They are, they're talking about where cancer therapy is going, but they're not the only ones. There's a lot of centers, Mayo Clinic, all the cancer hospitals and so on, are kind of doing the same thing. They really kind of do the same thing. That's what's happening. And the same thing being, as they said in the video, and keep in mind I'm not a doctor, so I can take that for what it's worth, but is my feeling that as they say in this video, I'm just quoting them really, is cancer is no longer an organ disease. You don't have liver cancer or lung cancer or pancreatic cancer or skin cancer or 200 different names of different prostate, colon, well, all the cancers that I'm sure you've heard of and so on. You don't have those. They're not an organ-specific disease. It's a genetic disease. We have to understand what they're trying to do is understand the genetic basis for these diseases. Now, I've seen many videos. If you watch a show, you've seen many videos that emphasize it. Eric Lander and Charles Sawyers and a lot of people that are very well-known cancer people. They define cancer as being a genetic disease. There's a guy, what's his name, Vogelstein at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine in Baltimore. Is always quoted as saying that it's a genetic disease. In fact, I think basically all diseases have a genetic basis, but cancer especially is a genetic disease. So here's the bottom line, folks, and they've only got a few minutes left here in the show. Here's the bottom line. As they say, they take a sample of your cancer cell, and they run it through a genetic test to find out what these proteins, or the genes that produce these proteins, how they match up, how they match to people. Okay, we start over again. They sequence these genes out and see if they're abnormal to the normal genes that they consider normal. Okay. Now they also use that information to compare that against other people who are getting a different drug for their cancer, and so that your profile, your genetic profile of your cancer cell in your body matches up with the protocol or the sequence of those particular cancer-causing genes, matches up with those. And in fact, the drug that this other person's taking is working. It seems to be working, as efficacy as they say in the medical business. It works. You're still alive. Well, it seems to me, if this doctor said, and that we probably won't show it again because it's too long now and I got enough time, but as one of the doctors said, they use a drug that they never would have thought of using for your cancer. Why? Because the cancer that you have, this cancer that drug worked with, may have been lung cancer or pancreatic cancer, not that one, but say colon cancer. But it worked for him. But you have the same genetic profile, but you don't have the same cancer. You have a different cancer. But now you got to make a decision, and your doctor has to make a decision. Well, maybe we should use that drug, because even though it's in a different organ, it in fact works. You have the same genetic profile, and it would hopefully work for your cancer. And that's a decision that you're going to have to make, or your doctor, in conjunction with your doctor, really. Because it doesn't necessarily mean first stage cancer treatment. Then you're you're diagnosed with a cancer, and then you get your initial treatment. That's a chance you're going to have to take if you do it. But if you've already had therapies and so on that they have not worked, then it becomes a little more clear. Maybe you should try this other drug anyway. Then all of a sudden you might do it, but then it's a lot of complicated stuff. The whole thing is complicated. I don't pretend to understand it all myself. Don't get me wrong. But I believe, and I'll get back to this subject many, many more times, because I'm getting information now from people who are treating cancer patients, not just in this cancer treatment centers of America, but all over. Hear it all the time. Baylor University, I just read something about them doing the same thing. It's coming. That's what I think it really is. It's getting personalized. Personalized medicine. What does that mean? It's genetics. It's your genes. It's your genetic makeup. You are a unique individual, and that's what they're trying to do. Thank you very much for treatment. Thank you very much. We'll see you again. Maybe I'll talk about Lois Capps next time.